it's time for the next session. There is not really a break in between at this point, but I think let's just begin with the next session. It's session 6 in room 1, and the session is about healthcare and explicability. We have 3 presentations in this session, and for each presentation overall we'll have 30 minutes. The idea is to have about 20 minutes for the presentation itself, and then around 10 minutes for discussion. These are not super strict time limitations, but still, I mean, this is what we are aiming for. So our first speaker in the session is Lorella Meola from the University of Salerno in Italy. Her presentation is AI Explicability in Medicine and Healthcare, Fighting Against the Return to the Paternalism. I think that's a very interesting title. Are you able to share your
No, I don't
screen?
have slides, no.
Oh, you don't have slides. Oh, that's fine. So
just...
you just talk. Yeah, wonderful. It's your turn. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. And my topic deals with AI explicability on one hand and the risk of paternalism on the other hand. So artificial intelligence is one of the most promising technologies in the contemporary medicine. Although we are still at the dawn of AI applications in medicine, however, we can think that in the future, algorithms will outperform physicians in terms of speed, accuracy, and reliability. However, I reckon despite this fundamental contribution to a more precise and personalized medicine, it might raise some problems. In particular, machines may not simply support the work of the doctor, but even replace the figure of the doctor and rewrite the role of the patient. Thus, it becomes urgent to face up to epistemological and ethical questions dealing with the nature of medical decisions and the ethical implications on the care relationship. If AI displays superior diagnostic and therapeutic capabilities compared to those of physicians, one may think that the doctor has an epistemic obligation towards machines in the decision-making process. On the other hand, however, this obligation might conflict with other values of the traditional therapeutic relationship, such as, for example, the empathy between doctor and patient, and which therefore could provide a valid reason for renouncing the doctor's epistemic obligation towards the machine. This potential conflict must prompt critical reflection on the role of AI that AI should play in the decision-making process within the doctor-patient relationship. The massive amount of data involved in such systems obscure both the transparency and the probability of their functioning and gives AI systems a high level of opacity. Opacity could be understood as the inscrutability of the mechanism underlying the algorithm's decision-making process, and hence the lack of clarity of the steps through which the data are interpreted. In sum, we can't know the explanation of how and why certain contents, recommendations, decisions were produced by data used as input. Thus, explicability is one of the most important epistemic and ethical challenges posed by AI. In the specific field of medicine, these difficulties exacerbated if we take into account that AI system can generate biases, which in turn could lead to people's discrimination. The efficacy of a treatment could be established according to partial canons without adequately taking into account the specificity of the patient, whose particular needs, personal, diagnostic, therapeutic needs, and so on, could be disadvantaged. Furthermore, AI systems may incorporate biases inherent to human decision-making, such as when physicians assess cases by taking into account the patient's age. So AI systems may incorporate these errors and they can apply them on time, even when such criteria could alter the correctness of the specific clinical assessment. Thirdly, AI systems formulate their decisions on the basis of groups of patients, and they may not always be able to choose the best treatment for an individual patient. The explicability of algorithmic decision-making mechanisms could correct model errors, optimize performance, and build a reassuring ethical and legal framework. It could promote users' trust towards these systems, or even it could guarantee users' right to an adequate explanation of the decision-making process whenever AI affects people's life considerably. Explicability could be understood in its epistemological meaning of intelligibility, as the call for explicability must primarily answer the question, how does an algorithmic decision-making process work? As well as in its ethical sense of responsibility, as explicability must answer the fundamental question, who is responsible for the way such a system works? From an epistemic point of view, a clear definition of explicability enables a careful examination of the decisions made by a system. It promises those who plan, develop, regulate AI system, as well as the end users, to detect systematic errors, correct incorrect decisions, and improve system performance. From an ethical point of view, the autonomy of individuals is guaranteed, responsibilities are correctly allocated, discriminatory biases are avoided, and users' trust in AI systems is promoted. In general, this approach allows the relationship between humans and technology to be framed on an easy, understandable basis. That said, the explicability could turn into a principle of biomedical ethics next to the traditional principle of biomedical ethics that are autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, justice. So this new biomedical principle of explicability aims to define the intelligibility of algorithmic processes and the clear identification of responsibilities with respect to the decision produced. Providing clarity within the black box allows us to balance the relationship between humans and machines, generally speaking, machines. For example, between the decision-making power we reserve for ourselves and that which we delegate to artificial agents. In short, it is a matter of drawing the boundaries of autonomy and responsibility of humans and machines, avoiding the risk to recognize a high level of autonomy in decision-making to machines, and promoting the decision-making autonomy of humans in order to reduce risks and protect the safety of humans, as well as to implement the effectiveness of such system. The opacity that characterizes AI systems could evidently cause consequences with respect to the decision-making process of the therapeutic relationship. If the mechanisms that produce specific medical results are not intelligible, and therefore the physician is not able to provide the patient with the necessary information to support them in the deliberative process, a black box medicine would be structured, which could undermine the foundations of physician responsibility and patient's autonomy. Even if we achieve excellent results, but without understanding the modalities and the reason for certain results, we risk losing a cornerstone of the therapeutic relationship, that is informed consent, and the related awareness of the risk-benefit analysis of a given treatment. Therefore, the problematic intelligibility should be a valid reason for granting patients the right to refuse a treatment proposed by AI and the right to request an alternative treatment. The principle of patient autonomy is now a milestone of therapeutic relation, despite its several definitions. However, we could understand it as the individual's ability to make decisions on the basis of a life project that each person chooses for themselves, but also as the ability to act in accordance with that project, insofar as there are no external impediments to the exercise of one's autonomy. The recognition of patient autonomy in decisions concerning health and illness has defined a new model of the relationship between doctor and patient as a complete alternative to the traditional and paternalistic one derived from Hippocratic medicine. The call for autonomy is therefore a necessary assumption to stem the risks of medical paternalism linked to the advances in biomedical technologies, such as, for example, the abuse of therapeutic means without adequately informing the patient and receiving the legitimate consent from them. The principle of autonomy is embodied in the instrument of informed consent. That is the practice through which the patient is asked for his or her approval to the intervention to be performed, and which is now taken as a point of convergence in everyday medical practice. The patient's choice must be preceded and supported by dialogue with the doctor. It is the latter, it's doctor who will make the patient aware in an appropriate manner of the truth about his or her state of health and illness, the reasons requiring a specific course of treatment, the foreseeable results and side effects of the therapy, and any alternative procedures. Informed consent does not derive so much from a lack of trust in the doctor. Patients trust doctors again, and therefore they turn to them, as from the patient's recognition of sovereignty over his or her own body and life, which requires decision-making ownership. Moreover, it stems from the realization that the patient's good is no longer an objective definition, but it is now chosen and established by the patients themselves, starting with and through dialogue with their doctor. Ever since the well-known definition of health formulated by World Health Organization, the focus has shifted from the disease, illness, to the consideration of the person in his or her totality and specificity, taking into account personal values and preferences. The patient becomes an active part of the therapeutic relationship, and therefore the physician will dialogue with the patient, trying to put together strictly medical information with the personal values, expectations, fears, so subjective values. In this way, the therapist ensures that the patient has effectively understood the information received and contextualize it in his or her life project in order to make an autonomous decision. Although this definition of the therapeutic relationship is undoubtedly generic, the richness of the doctor-patient relationship emerges, which is not limited to the disease alone, but it extends to the patient's whole person. The physician is not a mere repository of objective information, and the therapeutic model founded on the centrality of the patient is rich in values that go beyond the mere technical and scientific dimension, establishing a relationship based on listening, understanding, and support for the patient as a whole. The doctor must provide information about the clinical situation, and at the same time, they help to clarify the values contained in the available options and establish why certain health-related values are more worthy than others of being pursued. Within the therapeutic triangle, so patient, physician, and AI systems, information dialogue and thus autonomy and rationality in decision-making could be compromised, according to me. First of all, physicians could prove incapable of providing clear and transparent information to the patient, as they do not have sufficient elements to validate or discard a certain solution offered by AI due to their opacity. This difficulty could be exacerbated as the algorithms operate an analysis on groups or subgroups of patients who present similar characteristics associated with certain patterns and therefore may not adequately take into account the variability and as peculiarities of individual patients. Such classifications made on the basis of different criteria and purposes, as well as on non-health considerations such as ethnic origin or gender, could lead to discriminatory or arbitrary decisions. Moreover, although AI systems may be even more accurate and effective than doctors, they would lack the ethical capacity to relate to the person of the patient, taking into account the patient's preferences and interests that could be relevant for the purpose of the treatment. We have to consider that even if AI systems were able to evaluate not only medical data, but also the equally fundamental non-medical information, the availability of data might be limited. That means that data might not be, for example, up to date or privacy protected, and it might not reflect the patient's preferences and interests in their current state and in relation to a life's perspective disclosed by a certain clinical picture. Given these assumptions, I think medicine would risk tending towards the impersonal, reducing the patient to an objective understanding of a medical biological category built on a statistical basis. The result would be a reformulation of the entire system of care, which would affect the therapeutic relationship, but nosography too, health policies, as well as biomedical research, and would proceed towards standardization of practices and subjects involved. In particular, there seemed to be a split between reductionist and holistic view of the patient, which would reopen an old debate of the philosophy of medicine, in which medicine as an art and medicine as a technique are contrasted. Without going into the heart of the matter, we can recall, quoting Jaspers, for example, that the problem arises to the extent that these two aspects are separated. The object of medicine, the patient, is never completely objectifiable. In its technical action, medicine certainly relies on scientific knowledge, quantitative data, measuring instruments, but it does not ignore the fact that the patient is something other than a mass of numbers. They are rather an existence which never allows themselves to be quantified. Medicine is not only an objective science, but it claims a special art, namely the sense of the living that can never be fully rationalized. With respect to the outcomes produced by AI systems, a controversy has arisen in the literature on the subject. On one hand, there are those who argue that users should understand the reasons for determining outcomes, supporting a patient's trust in such systems. On the other hand, there are those who consider explicability an overstated principle and demand that only a certain level of accuracy and reliability be guaranteed, believing that the validity of the results make it unnecessary to evaluate the means and methods employed. Furthermore, medical decision-making has always been wrapped by a certain opacity. The etiology of certain disease, as well as the efficacy of treatments, for instance, may be uncertain even without calling AI into questions. For the most part, medical knowledge and practice would be a synthesis of empirical findings and clinical traditional inherited over decades. The patient's benefit would reflect the experience of the benefit without sufficient knowledge of the causes that produce it. In other words, Medical science has always proceeded through the testing of empirical evidence of association mechanisms, as it is the case of big data, without knowing the theories that underpin and explain pathological and therapeutic functioning. Above all, this empirical approach has always proved more effective than attempts to refer to a theory in order to identify the most suitable therapeutic pathway. In medicine, theoretical explanations have long not only proved to be false, but have sometimes even caused harms to patients. While on the contrary, clinical evidence has produced the most effective results. So it would be more appropriate to prioritize the diagnostic or predictive accuracy of an AI system instead of basing such systems on demanding principle of explicability, thereby gaining in clinical reliability. In short, machines would claim such high level of accuracy and competence that there would be no need to demand transparency in their operation. On the contrary, in the case of human agents who make decisions and perform actions, there is essentially the possibility of questioning the doctor, understanding the epistemic and the normative foundation on which they have built their recommendation, and verifying its plausibility with respect to general criteria of epistemic competence. It is not a matter of assuming the patient supervision of the doctor's actions, but of bridging the inevitable asymmetry between the two parties with an act of intelligent trust. That means a feeling of trust supported on rational grounds, identifiable in the doctor's competence with respect to the specific field of action, honesty, and trustworthiness. To trust another person is to epistemically and normatively grant him such authority. That means to recognize reasons for believing what they are saying on the basis of accuracy demonstrated over time in a special field, consistency in carrying out one's commitment, and awareness of one's own limitations and of the possibilities of others. In relation to patients, the doctor is an epistemic and moral authority. First, they are competent with respect to a specific field, and not only in that they possess accurate information, but also they have the ability to reconcile this information with the particularities of the case. They must identify possible alternative therapeutic paths, point out possible limitations and uncertainties with respect to the specific case. The physician is an interpreter of health. That means they must mediate between medical knowledge on one hand and the patient's values, interests, preferences on the other hand. The selection of the parameters considered as relevant, the evaluation of each possible therapeutic objective, the choice of means to achieve the identified goals, and the related consequences for the patient's life are all inherently normative aspects that cannot be reduced to objective categories alone. The vocabulary of medicine, which encompasses the concepts such as health, illness, pain, healing, and so on, poses an ethical as well as an epistemic question in which the objective dimension must be supplemented with an evaluation of the subjective perspective, and which calls for consideration of the patient's person in his or her entirety. The deliberative process undertaken by doctor and patient should encompass all these conceptual and methodological richness, and it is by virtue of this that the patient could assess whether the doctor is trustworthy or not. In order to ensure trust, it is not enough to disseminate information, but to make it intelligible, accessible by all parties concerned. The doctor's epistemic competence is closely linked to their ethical competence, because through communication with the patient, they make information usable for each specific biographical as well as clinical context. This interviewing of competence ensures that the physician can always provide answers to every question raised by patients. In the therapeutic relationship, the story that includes AI systems, we can find on one end a physician acting as an expert due to their training and experience, and on the other hand, an AI system acting as a medical expert due to the amount of data available. So on one hand, epistemic and ethical capabilities, albeit fallible. On the other hand, exclusive but sometimes opaque epistemic capabilities. At this point, one must ask how much weight the physician should assign to the diagnosis formulated by the algorithm, especially to the extent that his or her opinion should diverge from the product of the machine. The physician should decide whether to maintain his or her belief or to change it. In the latter case, however, they would lose not only their epistemic authority with respect to the clinical decision taken, but also their ethical authority, since they would not be able to dialogue in a transparent manner with the patient and appropriate to the latter's peculiarities. So in conclusion, while it is true that developments in AI are proving to be a fundamental tool in medicine, it is also true that they are undermining the possibility of shared decision-making within the therapeutic relationship. The warning of the doctor's epistemic and ethical authority in favor of an efficient but still opaque operating system could jeopardize the patient's decision-making autonomy, which is rooted in the patient's ability to trust the doctor. In my view, the problem does not concern the possible extinction of the figure of the physician, but since AI systems could assume a considerable degree of decision-making autonomy, this could upset the current arrangements of responsibility, giving rise to unpredictable and inexplicable actions. This would result in a major gap in the protection of the patient, who would no longer have the appropriate tools to assess the performance of the machine and to safeguard themselves against any unwanted or even harmful practices. Doctors should remain in control of healthcare system and medical decisions, while information and support from the doctors should be easily accessible and available to the patient for the proper use of technology. And to really conclude, this does not mean, therefore, renouncing the benefits that AI can undoubtedly bring to medicine, but promoting a critical reflection on patient autonomy and the practice of informed consent in the light of an irreversibly changed therapeutic relationship. Thank you, everyone, for the attention, and sorry for my English, that is my first language. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your great presentation and for stressing, you know, the role of informed consent, doctor-patient relationship, and how explicability, AI explicability plays a role in this context and what the implications are. And yeah, thanks a lot. I'm sure there are questions, comments, thoughts. Either raise your hand and unmute yourself or write something in the chat, whatever you prefer. Jeffrey, you are the first.
Great, thank you very much. I think I'm sympathetic with much of your approach and many of your concerns. I think you'll see what, and if you're in our presentation in a bit, you'll see some echoes of those. But I guess I'm positing a set of concerns I've encountered in these discussions, which is exactly whether the ideal standard, which I think you kind of called the therapeutic relationship, really obtains very often, how frequently doctors have that ideal standard. So I support physicians in the hospital as an ethicist sometimes. And I find that physicians often themselves don't know why they make some of the recommendations that they make. So if I pick something like dosing for a particular condition, physicians prescribe a certain dose to a patient. I find that often physicians are applying rules of thumb that they really don't have a deep understanding of. They have something like an algorithmic understanding of that prescription. And if they were pressed about it, they could, if they were questioned about it, they could not provide an explanation to the patient about why. So I wonder to what extent the ideal therapeutic relationship also has gaps in explainability to the patient. Have I made myself clear?
Okay, I hope I got your point. I told during my in my paper that I agree with you, because I think that doctors usually or sometimes don't give adequate explanation to the patients, even if they don't use AI systems. And as I just concluded, it's sure that AI systems can help doctors, so they are fundamental systems. But my problem is not just to eliminate the figure of the doctor. It's open a critical reflection about the integration of these systems in medical practices, because the problem, I think that the problem is first of all that we don't have a clear idea of what is medicine. So we don't know what are the ends of medicine and how we have to regulate medical practice. But so assuming this aspect, to use these systems, these AI systems, could be a problem because we don't know now at this moment. We don't know how they are functioning, because there is a high level of opacity that could be could be a problem for the medicine. So I don't think that AI systems are a bad aspect and we have to avoid them. Absolutely, they are important, but in this moment, I think it's important to have a critical opinion about these aspects. In fact, my paper, my idea is that we can't renounce to these the benefits of AI systems, but we have to promote a critical reflection, and we can't be so happy of these progress. We can say, because the problem is in the relation between machines and humans. So we have to know how machines are functioning to regulate our relationship, because in this moment, with these elements, we can't delegate our decision, our power to mechanisms that we don't know enough. I don't know if I got your point. Thank you for the question.
I mean, it's the experience of doctors, isn't it? And the intuitions that may play into this, Jeffrey, into these types of decisions. And I'm not sure whether we would have to assume, or it's a good idea to assume that decisions made by medical doctors or medical professionals need to follow the same way, the same decision-making structures as machines. I mean, it should be the other way around, and we could claim, okay, machines, they don't have these intuitions, these human experiences, isn't it? I mean, maybe I misunderstand.
Yes, I think my question was not clear. I think if I just said it in one sentence, my question, I think, was simply, if there are any cases where a physician cannot provide an explanation is that a case where the patient's autonomy has been compromised?
Yes, I agree with you. In fact, I told about this aspect in my paper, but I'm not sure that the AI systems in this moment can solve this problem, and because I think that we can't renounce to an aspect, the trust between doctor and patient is important, and it is important to self-determination of the patient is fundamental, in my opinion.
Are there other questions, comments, thoughts on the presentation or the topic? The very nice thing is that all three presentations are closely connected, so we will have a chance to have different perspectives on very topic on explicability in healthcare, doctor-patient relationship. Yeah, if there are no
Elizabeth, sorry, I was struggling to find the hand raising emoji. I will sort that out, but I'll jump in with a question if we've got time.
Yeah, just do it direct.
Okay, thanks. It was to follow up on this point. So I'm wondering about, I know in some of the talks that Jeff and I have had with others, we've encountered the suggestion that that really the results are what we care about most. And so I wonder, thinking about this with respect to patient autonomy, maybe it's an open question. So suppose that patients care both about the results and they care about what you've described as like the therapeutic relationship that includes explicability. But if the option were put to them, if they had to choose right between this, and they said, if say their doctors and other medical staff told them, the programs that work on these algorithms suggest that this is the optimal, course of treatment. And I've pushed for an explanation, like it's hard for us to understand why, but the results speak for themselves. So here are the results, here's their reliability. So we're unable to explain it, but my guess is it wouldn't be surprising if a lot of patients, right, for them, they would choose like whatever has the best results. Like I'll go with that. And so I wonder if there are cases where certainly like leaving it up to the patient, say, right, it's within their right, as you described, for them to want an explanation. And if no explanation is available, then, they should reserve the right to be able to reject, the treatment suggestion. But imagining these cases where the patients are happy to opt for what has reliably offered the best results without explanation, do you have a problem that persists under those conditions? Like, do you still think there's something problematic? Or as long as the option is put to patients, and if patients are willing to opt for the optimal results over explicability, does that settle the concerns for you, especially those having to do with autonomy? Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. I think that AI systems are important to optimize the results, but the problem, as I just said, is that we don't know which is the best result, because I think that, and this is the trend of medicine today, we are going towards a more personalized medicine. So the personalization of treatment requires necessary to take into account the preferences, the life project of everyone. And so I don't know, I'm not sure that artificial intelligence in this moment knows the best of the patient, the benefit of the patient, taking into account these subjective aspects. And And on the other hand, I think that even if we could have an idea of which is the best interest, the good of the patient, we can say, according to me, in my opinion, so this could be a problem because we are going, if we assume this aspect, we are going towards a standardization of medicine. We risk to lose the peculiarities of the patients that instead we can preserve in the therapeutic relationship. And even if because as you said, sometimes the patients sometimes don't want to know why the doctor assumes certain decides for a particular therapeutic path. Okay, but the doctor knows is or her patient. So for this reason, I think that trust, the personal knowledge between the doctor and the patient is fundamental. I know that it's very difficult in the great realities in the hospitals, for example, because where we have a lot of patients, so the doctors have some difficulties to approach with each patient in a personal manner. But I think that it's important to assume the medicine as an art. So we can't because we can't pursue the end of the medicine as a standard. There isn't the best treatment. But we have to know the patient. We have to know not only the clinical picture, but we have to know the biographical aspects, the interests of the patient, assuming that we don't know what is health, we don't know what is illness, disease, and we don't know the specific perimeters of medicine.
Thank you very much again, Lorella, for a great presentation, and thank you for your questions and for this really very interesting discussion.